poor boy from Chicago's South Side walked into the most luxurious bank in the city just to check his balance. The CEO laughed. Customers mocked him. But when the screen showed the number, the CEO's smile froze forever. Morning in Chicago stretched under a thin layer of cold, gray mist, the kind of air that stings the skin yet somehow makes people stronger if they're forced to live in it every day. On the sidewalk outside the towering glass building of Harrington Wealth Management, a 13-year-old boy stopped and took a deep breath. Eli Turner. His oversized, worn-out hoodie, the heels of his shoes patched clumsily with silver duct tape, everything he wore told the exact truth he'd never tried to hide. He was a kid from the South Side. And here, inside a lavish bank that served only the elite, everything belonged to a completely different world. Eli gently pushed the heavy glass door and stepped inside. Cold air from the air conditioning rushed over him, the complete opposite of the freezing streets outside. White marble floors shimmered under rows of warm, golden lights. Every step he took echoed in a space where anyone would think, "This boy doesn't belong here." The receptionist looked at Eli with a familiar expression, one the poor in Chicago understood all too well, a mix of caution, annoyance, and just a hint of disdain. Eli swallowed hard. He had stood outside this building 3 times before he dared to walk in. He knew how he looked, and he knew exactly what people would think. But he also knew one thing. Lily was waiting for him at home. His 7-year-old sister had asked him last night, "Are we having dinner today, Eli?" That question, and the look in her eyes, eyes that should still have been innocent, had pushed Eli to this very place. He stepped up to the front desk, his voice so small even he could barely hear it. I'd like to check my account balance." The receptionist tilted her head forward slightly, as if she needed to confirm she hadn't misheard. Then her gaze swept from the top of Eli's hoodie to the duct-taped shoes, and her lips curved into the thinnest line, not a smile, but a judgment. "You said, check your account?" Eli nodded, gripping the straps of his torn backpack so tightly it seemed like he needed them just to stop his hands from shaking. In the vast open space of the bank, the small boy looked as if a single gust of wind could knock him down. But in those deep, dark eyes, there was something no one in that room noticed. The determination of a child far too familiar with hunger. The receptionist hadn't even answered yet when a man's voice rose from the far end of the lobby, low, sharp, and filled with authority. "What's going on here, Megan?" The entire room seemed to shift its attention in one direction. From the glass elevator stepped out a man in a charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection. His polished black leather shoes shone enough to reflect the ceiling lights. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch, one that most people only dared to look at through a display case. Jonathan Harrington, CEO of Harrington Wealth Management, the man who appeared in American finance magazines once a month, the man whose mere presence changed the atmosphere of any room he walked into. And he was looking at Eli. Not just looking. It was a cold, irritated gaze, like someone had placed something out of place in the middle of his immaculate living room. "Who let this kid in here?" Jonathan said, not bothering to lower his voice. "This kid." No name, no identity, just a nuisance. A few customers turned to stare, some covering their mouths to stifle laughter. In places like this, contempt often arrived politely, but cut deeply. The receptionist stood up quickly. "Mr. Harrington, the boy seems to want to check his account balance." Jonathan let out a laugh, a dry, short laugh with no kindness in it. "Check his account? Here? Look at him, Megan. If he has an account at Harrington, then I'm the President of the United States." The people around laughed louder. The The sound echoed through the spacious lobby, and Eli felt it hit his chest like a blow. He lowered his head even more. His ears burned, his hands clenched until his knuckles went white. Jonathan folded his arms and stepped closer, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the marble. "Hey, kid." He leaned down, speaking loudly enough for the whole lobby to hear. "You think you can walk into a high-end bank like this, looking like that, and ask to check your balance?" Eli lifted his head. His eyes met the CEO's icy stare. For a moment, two opposite worlds looked straight at each other. A world of limitless wealth, a world of crushing poverty. And then Eli spoke, soft but clear. I have a card. This is the account my mom left for us." The lobby fell silent for a beat. Jonathan glanced down and saw Eli pulling out a black card from his backpack, bearing the exact logo of the bank he ran. Jonathan's face darkened. The smirk disappeared. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion? Suspicion? Irritation? He snatched the card from Eli's hand and turned it between his fingers. "Where'd you pick this up? Or did you take it from someone's mailbox?" Eli shook his head, cheeks burning. "No, my mom sent it. It's real." The words, "my mom," made Jonathan pause for half a second. But only half a second. He straightened and ordered, "Fine. Let's see what kind of show this boy is trying to put on. Megan, pull up the system. Let's take a look at this little genius's account." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Eli stood in front of the large display screen surrounded by dozens of prying eyes. His hands trembled, but he didn't move. To everyone watching, he was just a poor kid who had wandered into a place he didn't belong. None of them knew that, in just a few seconds, the truth on that screen would change everything. The computer in front of them let out a soft beep as the bank system opened the secure account access interface. Jonathan stood right beside it, one hand braced on the desk, the other gripping the black card as if he could snap it in half with just a squeeze. Every pair of eyes in the lobby locked onto the screen. The laughter was gone, replaced by curiosity mixed with amusement. They were waiting to watch a performance end in humiliation. Megan, the receptionist, began typing in the numbers. The pale blue glow of the monitor cast onto Eli's face, making him look even smaller in this glittering place. Jonathan folded his arms again, voice dripping with mockery. "All right, let's see what we've got here. Probably $12 from the school lunch subsidy, I'd guess." Some customers snickered, but Eli didn't hear them anymore. His ears were ringing. His heartbeat pounded so hard it hurt. Megan entered the final command. The cursor spun for a few seconds. Then, the screen lit up. Megan's expression changed instantly. The mockery disappeared, replaced by shock. Jonathan frowned. "What is it? Don't tell me the system froze." Megan didn't answer. She swallowed hard and stepped back half a foot, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Annoyed, Jonathan grabbed the monitor and turned it toward himself. 1 second passed, and every muscle on his face locked in place. The smug smile vanished. His spine snapped straight as if someone had electrocuted him. Across the screen, bold text glared back at him. Current balance, $52,873,412.09 USD. No one breathed. No one moved. No one blinked. A customer who had been holding up his phone, ready to record the drama, slowly lowered his hand. A woman in a pearl necklace gasped, clutching her husband's arm, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. Eli stood still, confused. I How much money do I have? Jonathan didn't answer. He looked at the screen, then at Eli, then back at the screen. For the first time that morning, he had no words. Another employee stepped forward quietly. Mr. Harrington? Is something wrong? Jonathan turned toward him, voice hoarse. The problem is that nothing is wrong. This amount is real. The entire lobby erupted. A customer stammered, A homeless kid? With 50 million? Another whispered, No way. He must be the child of someone powerful. Jonathan inhaled sharply, trying to swallow the mix of discomfort, embarrassment, and panic. Eli, meanwhile, was even more overwhelmed. He stepped closer, lightly tugging Jonathan's sleeve, voice trembling. Sir, that money, it really belonged to my mom? Jonathan couldn't meet his eyes. For the first time in years as a CEO, his hands felt ice cold. We need to talk in private, Eli. His voice held no arrogance, no mockery, only the shaken confusion of a man who had just realized he had mistreated the one person he should never have mistreated. Jonathan signaled for his assistant to open the VIP meeting room at the end of the hallway. He walked so fast that Eli practically had to jog to keep up. Behind them, the lobby still buzzed with whispers, as if everyone had just witnessed the impossible. The frosted glass door closed. The sounds outside disappeared. The meeting room was quiet, with a long walnut table, soft brown leather chairs, and a large painting of the Chicago skyline hanging on the far wall. Everything was luxurious to the point of feeling foreign. Eli stood in the middle of the room like he was standing in a world that wasn't meant for him. Jonathan turned his chair, took a deep breath, and faced Eli. Sit down, Eli. His voice no longer carried the icy edge from earlier. It was softer, but tight with tension. Eli sat on the edge of the chair, gripping the straps of his backpack, eyes still red from fear. Jonathan rotated the monitor toward Eli. Do you understand how much money this is? Eli shook his head. I've never seen a number that big. I only know my mom said she would take care of Lily and me. Jonathan's face froze at the mention of Lily, but before he could say anything, the door opened gently. An older man walked in, silver hair neatly combed, movements calm and steady, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had lived long, seen much, and learned compassion. Mr. Daniels. His suit wasn't flashy like the CEO's. His shoes weren't polished to the point of being blind like those of a wealthy show-off, but he carried something that commanded respect. A kindness so genuine that it slowed the entire room. Jonathan stood up. Daniels, I didn't call you. Mr. Daniels smiled. I know, but someone has to make sure this boy is treated like a human being. He looked directly into Eli's eyes, gentle but sharp enough to read the years of struggle the boy had endured. You're Eli Turner? Eli nodded. Yes, sir. Daniels placed a hand lightly on Eli's shoulder. From now on, you're safe. No one is allowed to insult you again. Eli's shoulders dropped, as if a heavy stone buried inside him had finally been lifted. Jonathan exhaled and stepped back. He wasn't used to being the one silently judged. Daniels pulled a chair beside Eli and opened his old, worn leather briefcase, not an expensive designer one, but the kind he had used for years, kept carefully because he valued things, not their price. He placed a thin file on the table and flipped through it as if reading a story. Eli, this account was opened by your mother 8 months ago. Eli frowned. My mom passed away 8 months ago. Daniels nodded slowly, his eyes lowering with respect. I know. And that same day was also the day her life insurance policy was released. Eli clenched his hands. Both hands trembled. My mom, she worked night shifts in a downtown office. She worked at the laundromat and at the diner. How could she have a policy that big? Daniels looked at him for a long moment. Then he answered, voice warm and steady. Because your mother didn't think only about the present. She thought about your future and your sister's, with everything she had. He slid a golden envelope toward Eli. Inside is the letter she left for you. The entire room seemed to stop. Eli reached out, touching the envelope, but his hand trembled too much to pull it open. He placed his hand over his chest, his heartbeat pounding painfully hard. Jonathan instinctively stepped back again. He wasn't accustomed to witnessing truth delivered in a form so simple yet so profound. Daniels spoke softly. Eli, do you want me to read it for you? Eli nodded. Tears spilled over his lashes. Daniels opened the letter. The paper was slightly yellowed. The handwriting was neat, patient, and full of love. He took a deep breath and began reading. My dear Eli, if you are holding this letter, it means I can no longer be there with you. Daniel's voice filled the quiet room like a prayer. Jonathan stood frozen. Eli trembled, and the dazzling world of wealth and marble and power was swept away, erased by a simple letter from a mother, like a soft breeze clearing dust from a clear pane of glass. Mr. Daniels unfolded the letter slowly, as if every crease held an entire lifetime of a mother who had quietly sacrificed everything. The paper was slightly yellowed, its edges worn, but the handwriting was strangely beautiful, steady, neat, and filled with the patience of a heart that had loved until its very last moment. He inhaled deeply, then began reading in his warm, steady voice, each word falling into the room with an invisible weight. My dear Eli, if you are reading this letter, it means I can no longer hold you in my arms. Not even one more time. I'm sorry. Sorry to my very core for all the birthdays I will miss, the mornings I won't wake you up for school, and the winters when I won't be there to wrap a warm coat around you and Lily. Eli lowered his head, his small shoulders trembling. Tears fell onto the wooden table like heavy knocks. Jonathan stood in the distance, motionless. He didn't understand why his throat felt tight or why his hand had involuntarily gripped the edge of his chair. Daniels paused briefly, took a breath, then continued. But Eli, I do not regret my life. People may look at me and say I was poor, that I worked too hard, that I was unlucky. But they do not know that I was the wealthiest woman in the world, because I was your mother. And Lily's. Jonathan turned away slightly as if he didn't want anyone to see his eyes turning red. Daniel's voice was steady, yet every sentence seemed to tear another piece from the heart of the trembling boy and from the silent man standing behind him. I knew my time was short, and the money I saved would never be enough to pull you two out of those dark corners of the city. So I did the last thing I could do for you both. I bought a life insurance policy. Every month, I paid a part of it, as steadily as my heart beat whenever I thought of you two. Eli raised a hand to cover his mouth, trying to stifle a sob. Daniels placed his warm hand on the boy's shoulder. a single anchor in a world that felt like it was falling apart. Jonathan closed his eyes, leaning lightly against the table, his face looking as if he had just been forced to see a reflection of himself, one he barely recognized. Daniels continued, slower now, each word crystal clear. Eli, money will not make you better than anyone else. You may live in a different home, attend better schools, and meet people I never had the chance to meet. But remember this. Those who are kind to you only because you're wealthy are the same people who would look down on you if you were poor. Eli went still. Those words felt like his mother was etching her final lessons directly into his heart, line by line, stroke by stroke. The air in the room grew heavy as Daniels reached the final part. Be kind, Eli. Remember me. Remember the jobs I worked. Be good to the night shift workers, the cleaners, the cashiers, because they too have a family waiting for them. They too have dreams stuck somewhere. Jonathan opened his eyes, staring blankly into space. He remembered every face he had walked past in the hallways each night, every janitor he had never bothered to greet. For the first time, he felt ashamed of things he had never cared enough to notice. Daniels drew in a deep breath. The last line was always the hardest to read. And lastly, Eli, take care of Lily. Let her grow up with the smile I spent my life protecting, and live happily, because that is the only thing I ever wished for both of you. His voice cracked as he read the final signature. I love you both. More than all the skies above Chicago. More than all the days I had left. Mama Turner. When Daniels folded the letter, Eli could no longer sit upright. He collapsed forward, crying with all the pain, longing, and love he never had the chance to give back to his mother. Daniels pulled him into his arms, holding him gently, like a father. Jonathan stood there, unable to speak a single word. It felt as if someone was squeezing his heart, and in that moment, for the first time in his long career built on pride and certainty, he felt small. Small beside a poor boy and the boundless love of a mother. The room fell silent after Mr. Daniels folded the letter. No one spoke. It was as if the air itself had stopped breathing. Eli was still leaning into Daniel's arms, his small shoulders shaking like a child who had nothing left to hold on to. On the other side of the table, Jonathan Harrington stood frozen, his hands clasped together in front of him, eyes lowered to the wooden floor as though he couldn't even bear to look at a boy, despite being the head of a financial empire. Jonathan wasn't familiar with this feeling. For 30 years as a CEO, he had always been the strongest person in the room, the one with the final word, the one with the power to judge. But now, he felt as though he were the one standing before a judge. And that judge was a boy with tear-swollen eyes and a letter from a mother who was no longer alive. Eli slowly lifted his head. His eyes were puffy, but the look he gave Jonathan was so sharp it made the man instinctively take a half step back. The boy didn't yell, he didn't rage, he didn't blame. He simply asked one question, his voice raw but every word clear. Sir, what exactly are you sorry for? For thinking I was poor? Or for treating me badly in front of everyone? The question hit the table like a heavy object dropping. Jonathan froze, breath catching in his chest. No one had ever asked him that. No one ever dared. But the boy in front of him, the boy who had lost his mother, gone hungry, been ridiculed, asked him straight to his face without a tremor. Jonathan opened his mouth but couldn't speak right away. For the first time, he realized that the words, "I'm sorry," could not be used as a social tool or as a convenient exit strategy. It had to be real. It had to come from a place inside him he thought he had lost years ago. After a few long seconds, he finally said, voice lowered, I'm sorry for both. And I know that still isn't enough. But it's the truth. Eli didn't look satisfied, but his eyes softened slightly. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that the apology was genuine. And for a boy like Eli, living in a world full of judgmental stares, having an adult speak truthfully was already something big. Jonathan took a deep breath and sat down across from him. The first time that morning, he lowered himself to be at the same level as the child. Eli, he said, not with the voice of a CEO, not with authority, but with the voice of a man trying to relearn how to speak like a human being. Do you understand why I was shocked? Because I've spent too many years living in the illusion that I know exactly who is rich, who is poor, who matters, and who doesn't. I judged you in a few seconds without seeing the greater truth. Eli tilted his head. What truth? Jonathan looked at him, really looked, seeing something he had missed entirely when they first met in the lobby. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. The truth that your mother was richer than everyone out there. His voice softened, not because of money, but because of her heart. Daniels watched Jonathan, slightly surprised by the unexpected sincerity, but he didn't interrupt. He understood Jonathan was going through a turning point, and that some moments must be spoken aloud by the person living them. Jonathan continued, I've spent my whole life believing that a person's worth comes from the watch on their wrist, the car they drive, or the balance in their account. But your mother, the woman who worked night shifts, morning shifts, weekends, showed me just how wrong I was. He clenched his fingers slightly, voice lowering with honesty. If I had met your mother, I would want to shake her hand. Truly. Eli lowered his gaze, gripping the letter as if he were holding the last piece of his world together. Daniels placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder for a moment, not to comfort him, but to acknowledge that Jonathan had stepped through a door he never thought he would open. No one spoke for several seconds. Each person was facing their own truth. Eli is facing loss. Daniels is facing the responsibility of protecting him. And Jonathan is facing the version of himself he had built his entire life around. Then it was Jonathan who finally broke the silence. He stood, walked toward Eli, but stopped at a respectful distance, honoring the boy's space. Eli, he said, you don't have to face all of this alone. I want to help. Not because you're wealthy, but because I was wrong. And I want to make things right. Eli wiped his tears and looked straight at him. No fear, no hesitation. Just a strange kind of strength, the kind found only in children who have grown up far too soon. Then, can you help me pick up my sister? Lily is at home alone. I don't want her to be scared. Jonathan paused, then nodded immediately. We'll go get your sister, he said, voice solid and trustworthy. Not as the CEO of this bank, but as a man who wants to correct the things he did wrong. And when the three of them walked out of the meeting room, none of them was the same as the people who had walked in. The afternoon in Chicago was dim and heavy, clouds hanging low as if pressing down on the entire city. Jonathan's luxury sedan crawled through streets he had never set foot in, old brick buildings stained with time, rusted railings, neon signs flickering with only half their letters still alive. This was the South Side, a place people like Jonathan only knew from grim news headlines, poverty, crime, unemployment. But sitting in the back seat next to little Eli, clutching the letter against his chest, Jonathan realized those headlines didn't even scrape the surface of the truth. When the car stopped in front of an old apartment complex, Jonathan looked up at the building. It looked like a strong enough wind could bring the whole structure down. Some windows were covered with cardboard. The front door was dented. The apartment number was crookedly hung. He stepped out of the car, and the moment his polished shoes hit the sidewalk, the air hit him. Dampness mixed with grease, cigarette smoke, and something else. The scent of life struggling to survive between what remains and what's already lost. Eli climbed out first. The boy wasn't ashamed, wasn't embarrassed. This was his home, the place he had lived and fought to survive through countless long days and cold nights. Jonathan followed closely behind, feeling awkward in his expensive suit, unable to figure out where to put his hands in a world so different from his own. A group of teenagers sitting on the steps stared at him. One of them stood and walked toward Eli.
"Eli, where you been all day? Lily's been crying non-stop. Mrs. Rodriguez was worried sick."
The boy glanced Jonathan up and down, suspicion in his eyes.
"Who's this guy? He doesn't look like he lives around here."
Eli replied simply, "He helped me." Just that. Yet the teenagers stepped back, their eyes softening. Jonathan realized something. In places like this, trust didn't come from money. It came from protection. And Eli, somehow, was part of the web of people protecting one another here. Eli led Jonathan inside the building. The hallway was so dark that Jonathan had to put a hand on the wall to avoid tripping over broken tiles. The smell of dampness was even more pungent. Above them, a flickering light sputtered a few times before dying completely. Eli climbed the stairs to the 4th floor without complaint, like he had done it thousands of times, every day, every night. At the door of apartment 4B, the wooden frame cracked and splintered. Eli turned the key. The door opened, and from inside came a small, trembling voice. "Eli?" The voice was scared, anxious. Lily ran out the moment she saw him, throwing herself into his arms so tightly it was as if she wanted to merge with him. She was tiny, with messy, curly hair and big black eyes filled with the fear children know when they're used to uncertain dinners and long, lonely nights. "I thought you left me," she whispered, voice shaking. Eli hugged her tightly. "Never. I always come back for you." Jonathan stood in the doorway watching them. The room was tiny, worn, peeling, filled with old second-hand furniture, but it was clean. Lily's crayon drawings were taped to the walls. Their mother's old clothes hung behind the door. A rickety chair sat in the corner, clearly used for years. Poverty was visible everywhere. But the love in that room was so real. It hurt. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor with silver hair and a kind face, stepped out of the small kitchen. She looked at Jonathan suspiciously before turning to Eli. "Where were you all day? Lily cried herself hoarse." Eli lowered his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I had to go to the bank. I had to check the balance." She let out a small laugh as if Eli had said something absurd, but Eli looked at Jonathan. Jonathan nodded, no words, just a solemn nod confirming Eli was telling the truth. Mrs. Rodriguez froze. Her eyes widened. "Eli, is the money real?" Eli didn't know how to answer. He simply handed her the letter. She brought a hand to her chest, tears spilling as soon as she read the first lines. "Ava Turner, that girl. She did what every mother in this neighborhood wants to do but never can." Jonathan looked at the three of them, Eli, Lily, Mrs. Rodriguez, standing in a room so small that one deep breath could shake it. And he realized this was the first time he had ever truly seen a poor family. Not through reports, numbers, or stories, but with the eyes of an actual human being. Still clinging to Eli, Lily looked up at Jonathan. She didn't look at him with fear, but with innocent curiosity. "Sir?" Jonathan bent down slightly. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily asked a question that made the entire room freeze. "Does this mean we won't be hungry anymore?" Jonathan felt his throat tighten, as if someone was gripping it from the inside. For the first time that afternoon, he couldn't maintain the calm face of a CEO. He couldn't blink. He couldn't answer right away. He could only nod, a slow, heavy nod that felt like a vow. "No, sweetheart. Starting today, you will never be hungry again." And in that moment, in a tiny, run-down apartment with 2 orphaned children and a kind neighbor, a wealthy CEO realized that everything he had believed about value, power, and status was wrong. And in that exact moment, Eli Turner, the boy who walked into a bank with duct-taped shoes, became the one changing the life of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The next morning, Chicago was covered in a thin, gentle layer of sunlight, as if the city had just shaken off a long night of rain. Jonathan drove to the headquarters of Harrington Wealth Management earlier than he had ever arrived, so early that the security team hadn't even changed shifts yet. The tower's glass exterior reflected his silhouette, but it was no longer the image he had known for the past 30 years. Not the image of a confident CEO walking in a perfect suit. Not the man who believed he understood the value of everything. Not the man who judged Eli with a single glance. But a Jonathan, learning how to become a decent human being. He pushed the door open, didn't turn on the lights, and didn't call for his assistant. He simply stood in the vast, empty lobby, the same place where yesterday he had humiliated a poor child in front of dozens of wealthy clients. The only sound was the soft whirring of a small vacuum cleaner. A thin, middle-aged woman was wiping the reception desk. She froze when she saw him. "Mr. Harrington?" she said, her voice trembling as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Jonathan walked over, not carrying the usual aura of authority. "Good morning," he said softly. So softly he surprised even himself. "What's your name?" The woman blinked in shock. I'm Mary. Mary Collins." Jonathan nodded, then held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Collins." She stared at his hand as if she couldn't believe it was really being offered to her. In her 15 years working here, not a single manager upstairs had ever known her name, let alone the CEO. Her hand trembled as she shook his. Jonathan looked into her tired but gentle eyes and remembered Eli's mother's words. "Night shift workers all have a family waiting for them to come home." "Thank you for keeping this place clean," Jonathan said. Those 4 simple words nearly brought Mrs. Collins to tears. Soon after, the rest of the cleaning crew arrived. One by one, Jonathan asked for their names, family stories, where they lived, and whether they were doing okay. Not as a PR gesture, but as a man seeing the world with equal eyes for the first time. By 7 a.m., employees began arriving. Everyone froze when they saw Jonathan sitting in the lobby, chatting with the cleaning team like old friends. Silence spread through the building, a silence of disbelief, of witnessing something unheard of. Jonathan stood and spoke loud enough for the senior managers gathering above to hear. "Starting today, we change everything." The board meeting that followed felt like an earthquake. Wealthy board members sat around the long table staring at Jonathan as if he'd gone insane. He stood tall, voice steady and firm. "I propose tripling the salaries of our entire cleaning and maintenance staff. I want full health insurance for them, paid leave, and a family support fund. The CFO shot up from his seat. "Jonathan, are you out of your mind? That's millions of dollars every year," Jonathan responded immediately. "And that is the amount a bank should have been paying all along to the people who keep this place running every single day." Another member slammed his hand on the table. "Low-level staff don't need that much." Jonathan met his eyes, voice low and sharp enough to make the entire room shudder. "They are not low-level staff. They're the people who clean the floors you're standing on." Daniels, sitting at the far end, smiled quietly. For the first time in years, he saw Jonathan growing, as if peeling off the layers of armor that wealth had forced him to wear. The debate lasted nearly 2 hours. Half the board fiercely opposed it, but Jonathan did not back down. He was no longer the mocking CEO from the lobby the day before. He was a man who had seen truth, and that truth had made him stronger than he had ever been. When the vote finally happened, the result was nail-bitingly close. And then, the proposal passed. Several furious board members stormed out. Jonathan simply bowed his head and thanked the ones who remained. That very afternoon, an internal announcement was sent to every employee. From this day forward, Harrington Wealth Management will be a place where every person is treated with the dignity they deserve. Because this company does not exist thanks to the money of the wealthy. It exists thanks to the work of everyone. And as Jonathan signed the final document, he suddenly remembered the image of Lily clinging to Eli in that tiny apartment. Her trembling question. "We won't be hungry anymore, right?" Jonathan told himself, not just those 2 children, but no other family should have to be hungry either. That day, Jonathan Harrington left the bank headquarters not as a CEO, but as a man learning how to be kind again. 3 days after Jonathan implemented the historic new policies at the bank, Chicago experienced an early cold snap. Winds carrying moisture from Lake Michigan swept through the streets as if reminding the city that winter was coming. But for Eli and Lily, this was the first winter in years that didn't feel terrifying. Jonathan returned to the siblings' new home with Daniels. The upscale apartment tower sat near the riverbank with 24/7 security, an elevator that moved as smoothly as air, and hallways that always smelled of fresh wood and lavender. As the building manager led them to the door, Jonathan hesitated. Would Eli feel out of place in a world like this? The door opened, and the first thing he saw wasn't expensive furniture, but Lily's drawings covered the walls. Bright colors everywhere softened the space, warmed it, made it feel alive in a way that made Jonathan laugh out loud. Lily ran out from the living room, still holding a crayon. "Mr. Jonathan!" She rushed over and hugged his legs. Jonathan bent down, patting her head, feeling a sweetness he hadn't felt in years. The same sweetness he once only felt when his own daughter was small. Eli stepped out behind her. He wore new, well-fitting clothes, and his hair had been trimmed neatly. But the most significant change wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. Still dark, still deep, but brighter now, like the fire of someone who knows he has a future. "I have something to say," Eli said, sounding far more serious than a boy his age. Jonathan and Daniel sat on the sofa. Eli sat opposite them, hands on his knees like someone trying to steady their nerves. "These past 3 days, I've been thinking a lot," Eli began. "About Mom, about the letter, about what she wanted for us." Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He knew this was going to be important. Eli took a small notebook from his backpack and placed it on the table. Inside were pages filled with shaky but careful handwriting. "I looked stuff up online, read about charities, about programs for kids in poverty, about how people set up scholarships." He looked up, eyes glowing like tiny flames. "And I want to do that." Daniels tilted his head. You mean... Eli swallowed. I want to start a foundation, named after my mom. His voice trembled slightly, but not with doubt. The Ava Turner Foundation, to help kids like us. Kids scared their dinner won't be there. Kids who have to grow up too fast. Jonathan couldn't hide the emotion hitting him. This idea didn't come from a boardroom or a wealthy advisor. It came from a 13-year-old boy who had just lost his mother. Eli continued quickly, as if afraid he'd lose courage if he stopped. Mom said in her letter, money won't make me better than anyone, but money can help me do good. He looked directly at Jonathan, a look that made Jonathan's throat close up. I don't want to waste it on things that don't matter. I want to use 10 million to start the foundation. Jonathan shot upright as if shocked. Eli, 10 million is too much. You have a future ahead of you, and Lily. Eli shook his head. I know, but 10 million could help so many people. And if Mom were still here, she would do it. Silence crashed over the room. Jonathan slowly sat back down, fingers interlocked in front of his mouth. He looked at Eli like he was seeing a younger version of himself, but better, brighter, braver. A boy with nothing in his hands, talking about helping an entire community. Finally, Jonathan asked, voice deep and sincere, And you want me to help, don't you? Eli nodded. I only know how to dream, but you know how to make dreams real. Such a simple sentence, but it struck Jonathan like a vow. No one had ever said anything like that to him. No one had ever believed in him that way. He took a long breath, then spoke slowly, each word firm. Eli, I'll help you, but on one condition. Eli looked nervous. What condition? Jonathan leaned forward. His voice was gentle but firm. You will lead the foundation. Not when you grow up. Right now. I don't want this to become a grown-up's foundation with your mother's name on it. I want it to be yours, with your heart in it. Eli's eyes widened. But I'm just a kid. Jonathan laughed softly, but it was a proud, warm kind of laugh. Exactly. And because you're a kid, you understand what kids need better than anyone. Daniels nodded, voice soft. You understand hunger better than most people who've ever founded a charity. That's your strength. Eli was quiet for a few seconds. Then he nodded. A small nod, but steady, like stepping onto a path he didn't fully understand yet, but wanted to walk anyway. Jonathan looked at the two siblings, then out at the gray Chicago sky through the window. He never imagined his life, a life of reports, profits, and power, would turn this way. And he whispered, unsure if it was to them or to himself, Thank you for giving me a chance to fix who I am. None of them knew that this moment would become the beginning of something far bigger, a movement, a quiet revolution sparked by a poor boy with duct-taped shoes. 1 week after Jonathan implemented the historic new policies at the bank, Chicago experienced an early cold snap. The wind carried moisture from Lake Michigan, sweeping through the streets as if reminding everyone winter was on its way. But for Eli and Lily, this was the first winter in years that didn't feel frightening. Jonathan returned to the siblings' new home with Daniels. The upscale apartment complex stood near the river, with 24/7 security, an elevator that moved as quietly as a whisper, and hallways scented with new wood and lavender. As the manager escorted them to the door, Jonathan felt a brief worry. Would Eli feel out of place here? The door opened, and the first thing he saw wasn't expensive decor. but Lily's drawings cover the walls. Bright colors softened the entire room, warming it, making it alive in a way that made Jonathan laugh. Lily rushed out of the living room, still holding a colored pencil. "Mr. Jonathan!" She ran to him, throwing her arms around his leg. Jonathan bent down, ruffling her hair, feeling a sweetness he had forgotten, something he had only felt when his own daughter was small. Eli stepped out behind her. He wore new, well-fitted clothes, his hair neatly trimmed. But the most significant change wasn't on the outside. It was in his eyes. Still dark, still deep, but now brighter, like someone who finally believed in a future. "I have something to tell you," Eli said, sounding older than 13. Jonathan and Daniel sat on the sofa. Eli sat across from them, hands resting on his knees, trying to steady his nerves. "These past 3 days, I've been thinking a lot," Eli began. "About Mom, about the letter, about what she wanted for us." Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He knew this was a turning point. Eli pulled a small notebook from his backpack and placed it on the table. Inside were pages of handwriting, shaky but careful. "I searched online. I read about charities, programs for poor kids, how people create scholarships." He looked up, eyes glowing like sparks. "And I want to do that." Daniels leaned slightly forward. "You mean?" Eli swallowed. "I want to start a foundation, named after my mom." His voice shook just a little, but there was no doubt. "The Ava Turner Foundation, to help kids like us. Kids are afraid there won't be dinner, kids who have to grow up too fast." Jonathan couldn't hide the emotion tightening his throat. This idea didn't come from a boardroom or an adult with influence, but from a 13-year-old boy who had just lost his mother. Eli continued quickly before fear could catch up to him. "Mom said in her letter, money won't make me better than anyone else, but I can use it to do good." He looked at Jonathan, a look so sincere it stunned him. "I don't want to waste it on things that don't matter. I want to use 10 million to start the foundation." Jonathan shot upright. "Eli, 10 million is too much. You have your future, and Lily—" Eli shook his head firmly. "I know, but 10 million can help so many people, and if Mom were still here, she would do it." The room fell into stunned silence. Jonathan slowly sat back, hands interlaced in front of his mouth. He looked at Eli and saw a younger version of himself, but better, braver, kinder. A boy with nothing in his hands, talking about helping an entire community. Finally, Jonathan asked quietly, "And you want me to help, don't you?" Eli nodded. "I only know how to dream, but you know how to make dreams real." Such simple words, but they struck Jonathan like a bolt from the blue. No one had ever said something like that to him. No one had ever believed in him that way. He took a deep breath and said slowly and clearly, "Eli, I will help you, but on one condition." Eli's eyes widened, nervous. "What condition?" Jonathan leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "You have to lead the foundation. Not when you're older. Now. I don't want this to become another adult-run charity with your mother's name. I want it to be yours, with your heart in it." Eli blinked. "But I'm just a kid." Jonathan let out a soft, proud laugh. "Exactly. Because you're a kid, you know what kids need better than anyone." Daniels nodded. You understand hunger better than most people who've ever founded a charity. That is your strength. Eli stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. A small nod, but steady, determined. Jonathan looked at the two siblings, then at the gray Chicago sky outside the window. He never imagined his life, built on balance sheets, profits, and power, would take this direction. He murmured, unsure if he was speaking to them or to himself. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix who I am. None of them knew this moment would become the beginning of something far greater. A movement, a quiet revolution sparked by a poor boy with duct-taped shoes. 1 week later, Jonathan received a call from Channel 7 News, Chicago's largest TV station. They had heard rumors spreading rapidly through the financial world. The CEO of Harrington Wealth Management had suddenly tripled the pay of the cleaning crew and overhauled the entire policy structure. The media smelled something unusual, like sharks sensing blood. But this time, they had no idea what story was about to surface. Mr. Harrington, the reporter said on the phone, we've heard there's a truly special story behind your reforms. Jonathan glanced at Eli, who was doing homework at the kitchen table, Lily coloring beside him. He hesitated. This wasn't his story alone. It was the story of a boy who had just lost his mother. Jonathan asked softly, Eli, do you want your mother's story to be told? Eli set his pencil down, silent for a few seconds. He looked at the letter on the table, the letter that never left his side. Then he looked up, voice soft but firm. If her story helps people be kinder, then I want to tell it. Jonathan felt his throat close. So they agreed. The interview was filmed in the largest conference room of Harrington Wealth Management. Chairs and tables were moved aside. Studio lights reflected off the marble floor. The entire building fell silent at the sight of the TV crew. Employees gathered in the hallway, watching as if it were a historic moment. Eli sat beside Jonathan. He wasn't dressed in expensive clothes, just a clean white shirt, simple jeans, and neatly brushed hair. Lily waited backstage, drawing, watched over by Mrs. Patterson. The reporter, Sarah Nguyen, placed the microphone on the table and looked at both Jonathan and Eli with deep respect. We're ready to begin. Jonathan inhaled. This wasn't an interview about a bank. This was an interview about the transformation of a life. When the cameras turned on, the light washed over Jonathan and Eli. Sarah began. Mr. Harrington, Chicago is buzzing about you. A CEO known for strict discipline and a cold leadership style, now becoming the pioneer of the most humane policy in modern finance. What changed you? Jonathan looked briefly at Eli, then answered, I met a boy, and that boy showed me I've been seeing the world wrong my entire life. Sarah raised her eyebrows slightly, signaling him to continue. Eli walked into my bank wearing torn clothes and duct-taped shoes. I thought he was lost. I said things I'm ashamed to repeat. He swallowed hard. I insulted him, in front of the entire lobby. The camera moved to Eli. He looked down at his hands, but he didn't hide. Jonathan went on, voice trembling slightly. And then I checked his account. It had $47 million. The entire crew seemed to stop breathing. Sarah asked, a poor boy with that much money? Why? Jonathan nodded toward Eli. Tell them. This is your story. Eli inhaled slowly. His voice was soft, like he was speaking in a classroom, but every word hit like a wave. It's the money my mom left, because she knew she wouldn't live long. The room went silent. Eli continued. She worked 3 jobs. She always said she was fine, but she wasn't. And she didn't want us to worry. His voice shook, but the words stayed clear. She paid her insurance little by little, every month, for 10 years. And she wrote me a letter. The camera zoomed in on Eli's hand holding the letter. No direction needed. The crew knew they were filming something real. She said, "Money won't make me better than anyone, but I can use it to do good." Eli looked up, eyes wet but unwavering. "And I want to start a foundation in her name to help kids like us." Sarah placed a hand over her heart, struggling to stay composed. Behind the cameras, someone quietly wiped away tears. Jonathan spoke next. "He taught me that the value of a person isn't measured by their account. It's measured by their heart. And because of that, I want to announce publicly today, I will donate $10 million to help Eli establish the Ava Turner Foundation." The crew froze. Sarah stared in shock. Eli turned to Jonathan, mouth open. "Really? 10 million?" Jonathan nodded, voice thick. "It's the least I can do, to apologize to your mother." The room didn't break into applause. It didn't need to. It simply glowed, the kind of glow that happens when a spark is lit at the coldest moment of winter. Sarah ended the interview with a line that would later be quoted thousands of times. "Sometimes, to change an entire system, all it takes is one child brave enough to speak the truth." The interview aired that evening, and within 24 hours, Chicago exploded. Social media exploded. The entire country exploded. Not because of the money, not because of the bank policies, but because of the image of a poor boy who had lost his mother sitting next to a wealthy CEO, and the way the two of them changed each other. That evening when the interview aired, Chicago seemed to come to a standstill. In downtown diners, TVs flickered on. In high-rise apartments, the glow of screens reflected off glass windows. In Southside, Eli's neighbors crowded into Mrs. Rodriguez's tiny living room around her old television, no one daring to speak loudly when Eli appeared on the screen. All of America saw a 13-year-old boy in a white shirt, his eyes still swollen from crying, but shining with a belief in his mother and in the future. They heard the story of a woman working 3 jobs, paying her insurance little by little, and leaving behind a letter that touched the hearts of millions. And they watched as a wealthy CEO, once known for being cold and rigid, sat beside that boy, admitted he was wrong, and changed. Within a single night, everything exploded. Jonathan's and Daniel's phones rang non-stop. The bank's inbox flooded with messages from across the country. I cried. My daughter cried too. Thank you, Eli, for reminding us what kindness means. I've been a janitor for 20 years. This is the first time I've ever felt seen. Can our CEO learn something from a kid like Eli? Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, all flooded with hashtags. Hashtag Ava Turner Foundation, hashtag Be Like Eli, hashtag Kindness is Power. A teacher from Arizona wrote, I'm using this video in my class tomorrow to show my students that kindness carries more power than anything else. A single mother in Texas wrote, I know what Ava Turner went through, and I pray I can leave something this meaningful for my child too. A group of high school students in Boston created a fundraising page. We want to raise money for kids living the way Eli used to. Even prominent CEOs, the kind who never wanted to touch humanitarian issues, were forced to speak up. One wrote, It's time we rethink how we treat frontline workers. Another, This story made me reflect on how I treat everyone in my company. And then something unexpected happened. politicians got involved. A senator in Illinois proposed a bill to support insurance access for low-income working families. A representative in California sought to fund programs supporting children in poverty. Ava Turner began appearing in policy discussions, not as a tragic symbol, but as a symbol of hope. Hundreds of handwritten letters were sent to Eli's new apartment. Thick envelopes, thin envelopes, rushed handwriting, careful handwriting. Among them, one letter made Eli stand still for several minutes. "Eli, you helped me reconcile with my son. Thank you for reminding me that the most important thing isn't money, but how we treat each other." Lily received a box from a kindergarten class in Florida. Inside were teddy bears, candy, and a card written in shaky child handwriting. "Lily, we're sending bears for you. Bears never let anyone go hungry." Jonathan stood beside Eli as the boy read each letter. None of the words were addressed to him, yet he felt as if every sentence was speaking directly to his heart. Jonathan had changed, truly changed. The next morning he arrived at the office at 5:30 a.m., not to read reports, but to wait for the cleaning team. This time he didn't shake their hands as a polite gesture. He asked, "How old is your son now?" "Is your mother feeling better?" "Do you need help with the insurance paperwork?" They looked at him without fear, but with gratitude. Jonathan no longer referred to them as staff. He called them by their names. Meanwhile, Eli was changing the future of an entire generation. The Ava Turner Foundation received over $3 million in donations within 48 hours. Not from the wealthy, but mostly from poor families, sending $5, $10, $20. People started calling them the kindest dollars in America. Eli wasn't used to the attention, but he had something no one could teach, a heart shaped by hunger, and by love that grew out of that hunger. One night, while eating dinner in their new kitchen, Eli told Jonathan, "I don't want other kids to ask the question Lily asked." Jonathan nodded. That question from a 7-year-old girl, followed him into his sleep. Now, we won't be hungry anymore. Right? The story spread far beyond Chicago. It became a topic at universities. Sociology professors analyzed it. Law students used it in policy discussions. A pastor in Alabama preached a sermon called "The Spirit of Ava Turner." A famous rapper posted a video about Eli, ending with, "This kid did what a lot of adults can't do. He looked at people with kindness before he looked at their wallet." And all of it began with one poor boy walking into a bank just to check his account balance. Cold winds from Lake Michigan swept through the streets of Southside, lifting dry dust, loose newspaper sheets, and familiar taco stand calls echoing from the corner. Jonathan slowed the car as they approached the old apartment building, the same place where just weeks earlier a 13-year-old boy had stood trembling in duct-taped shoes. Now, Eli stood beside him, wearing a thick coat. His face was calmer, and the path ahead seemed less uncertain. Lily held his hand tightly, carrying the teddy bear sent by the kindergarten class in Florida. When the car stopped, Mrs. Rodriguez was already standing by the door, her arms folded against the cold wind, but her eyes were bright, as if she were waiting for something momentous. "You're here," she said, voice trembling. Eli stepped out first, and the doors began to open. Neighbors peeked out, kids ran over, and adults nodded in greeting. They didn't look at Eli like a TV personality. They looked at him like the child they had watched grow up in this building, who had now carried their story to the entire country. Jonathan watched the scene, his chest tightening. He never imagined respect could grow so profoundly from the poorest places. But today, it felt stronger than any medal or award he'd ever received. Eli turned to Jonathan. "Today, let's tell everyone, okay?" Jonathan nodded. They climbed the cracked stairs again, but this time not to scrape through the remnants of a hard life, but to plant hope back into the community. Eli stood in the chipped hallway surrounded by dozens of poor but kind neighbors who had always shared what little they had. He lifted a sheet of paper. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Clear enough that even the peeling walls seemed to stop and listen. The Ava Turner Foundation will open its first office right here in this neighborhood. Gasps spread across the hallway, followed by soft, emotional murmurs. Eli swallowed, continuing. We'll provide free dinners for kids here. We'll offer scholarships. We'll help people who work like my mom did. Night shifts when the city sleeps, when no one notices. A man from downstairs spoke up, voice gravelly. Kid, Ava would be proud. Mrs. Rodriguez raised a hand to her mouth, trying to hide her tears. Lily tugged her brother's sleeve and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eli, Mom is watching from the sky. Eli lowered his head, tears falling onto the exact spot where he had first read his mother's letter. The wind rushed through the hallway, icy cold. Yet somehow, no one felt it anymore. Jonathan stepped forward. He rarely spoke to crowds without a suit, without the CEO persona. But his voice was deep and sincere, stopping everyone in their tracks. It took me many years to learn how to be a better human being, and this boy taught me in just minutes. All eyes turned to Eli. Jonathan faced him and spoke slowly. Money doesn't make a person rich. What they do with it does. Eli looked at him, long and steady. Then he replied with a sentence that would later be quoted across the country. My mom left me money, but what she left me most was a heart that knows how to care. In that moment, Jonathan felt as if his entire life had been placed back into the correct position, back into meaning. He bowed his head, for the first time in his life, to a 13-year-old boy. Not because of money, not because of publicity, but because of gratitude. Southside was no longer a neglected corner of the city. It had become a place where one life changed and another was redeemed. Months later, the first office of the Ava Turner Foundation opened at the base of that old building. The lights stayed on late into the night. Children gathered to do homework. Workers stopped by for a hot dinner. Jonathan and Eli still met every week, not as a CEO and a VIP customer, but as two men, one older, one younger, learning how to be better than they were yesterday. And sometimes, when the office doors closed, Jonathan swore he could hear Ava's voice in his mind. Thank you for seeing my child. Today's story isn't about money. It isn't about banking. It's about a mother's love, powerful enough to change an entire city. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always prevails. And if you want to join us on this journey of telling healing, life-changing stories, like, share, and subscribe to Deep Life Tales. Because sometimes, one single story can light up an entire life.